pigeons and even jays. And that is all done through ambush, because their prey doesn't know the sparrowhawk is coming until the very last second. The sparrowhawks mate for life, and the female, and when the female lays the eggs, it's the male's job to provide her with food to keep her fed while she is brooding over 3 to 6 eggs for 32 to 35 days. And when the eggs hatch in succession over 2 or more days, so that the chicks are different sizes. As I mentioned earlier, sparrowhawks are ambush hunters, and they use every bit of cover from trees to hedges to creep up on their prey unnoticed until the last moment. When they get close to their target, usually on a bird feeder in a garden, they swing their long legs forward and grab their unsuspecting prey with lightning speed, and it's all over within the blink of an eye. All that you will see is scattered feathers, and hear the alarm calls of other birds still fleeing for cover. Here is the sparrowhawk's range across much of Britain. Now, the next animal I'm going to show you is one of the most beautiful birds we have here in the UK, the song thrush. The song thrush is the second largest thrush in Europe after its cousin, the missel thrush, and it can be heard living up to its name in spring when the male performs from the treetops to claim his breeding territory. Song thrushes are heard living up to their name in spring, as I already mentioned. And the song consists of a series of vigorous, simple phrases that are less richer than that of the blackbird, but with a penetrating quality. The fluting notes are often intercepted with harsh, impure tones, and some mimicry of other species. The thrush will usually sing each phrase 2 or 3 times before moving on to the next. The song thrush can quite often be mistaken for its cousin, the missel thrush, but it is smaller and browner than the missel thrush, with smaller spotting. But the best way is to try and see how high up in the tree it's perched. Now, the missel thrush tends to favour the very top of the tallest tree, while the song thrush can be found slightly lower down. And the male song thrush will use his song to attract a mate once he's established his territory. Then the female will build the nest, which is a cup of mud inside woven grasses and twigs and moss and even roots, and that can take weeks to complete. And the pair will often raise 2 broods in a season, sometimes more, and they tend to, and the female mainly tends to brood the eggs alone, but they also tend to nest in hedgerows or trees with plenty of cover. Unfortunately, of course, the song thrush lives in woodland, farmland, and scrubland, parks and gardens across the UK. They favour anywhere with a good supply of trees and bushes for them to nest, but also so they can raise their young and find food. And their eggs are usually glossy blue and hatch around after 2 weeks. Song thrushes, unfortunately, have been in deep decline since the 1970s, especially in farmland areas. This is because of new farming practices that are resulting in the destruction of hedgerows and woodlands that provide much of the thrush's food, and also safe nest sites. But also the use of pesticides used by farmers and gardeners to kill slugs and snails are also to blame, and this is having an effect on snails, which are one of the song thrush's main food supplies. The song thrush feeds on invertebrates such as beetles and worms, but their main food source is snails. Now, the song thrush has evolved a unique talent for eating snails, which is done by no other bird, although some have been known to steal the fruits of its efforts. And how the thrush does it is it will take a snail shell and then it will use a rock like an anvil and smash the shell of the snail to pieces against it. And although this is the most famous of the song thrush's feeding methods, they get much of their food in other ways, like you've quite often seen one having a tug of war with a worm in the lawn. Song thrushes, like many birds of Britain, can struggle in winter because as much of their invertebrate prey disappears in winter. But they, like their missile thrush cousins, can rely on fruit and berries in the winter, but they can also rely on nuts and seeds left out by humans. But the male must guard his territory throughout the winter until spring, where he can perform his famous song. While song thrushes may be in decline, they are still a common sight in Britain, just as long as there's a safe and wild place for the song thrush to nest, find food to raise its young, and of course perform its famous song each spring to keep the countryside of Britain in spring filled with the song of this famous bird. Of course, here is its range throughout Britain. Now I'm going to be moving on to a bird that is... Just give me a moment, I just need to get a quick drink. Oh, that's bad. Now, I'm going to move on to a bird that is associated with myth and legend. The barn owl. The barn owl is one of Britain's most mysterious birds. And they are found across Europe, but in the British Isles they are found across Britain in many habitats, from forests to farmlands. Barn owls are distributed across Great Britain and Ireland. They live in open countryside and farmland and can quite often be seen on roadside verges, but they can sometimes be seen on the edge of woodland. But they will live anywhere that gives them a place to live and to hunt for food. Barn owls are quite medium-sized owls with long, broad and rounded wings, and that are with the wingspan being about 44 inches, a short tail, sharp talons and a medium-length hooked beak, and a softly rounded head without ear tufts. Barn owls have a very distinctive heart-shaped face, and that's because they also have dark eyes. They have also a mottled grey and buff back, while their underside is pure white. And it is believed that this is the reason folk in the Middle Ages believed in things like ghosts and banshees. I have to forgive that noise, that's just one of our night staff coming on. barn owls are a bird that has been associated with myth and legend throughout the history. In fact, as an example, for why people believed in ghosts and banshees in the Middle Ages, as an example, if a soldier or a knight was out on the battlements of a castle at about dusk time on a misty evening, and they see this white shape gliding out across the land over the mist and hear this hissing screech, barn owls being the only owl in Britain that don't hoot, that is possibly why people believed in ghosts and banshees, because of the barn owl. And barn owls feed on rodents and other small mammals, but mostly voles, mice and shrews. And they occasionally take bats, small birds, amphibians and invertebrates. They hunt their prey by using their acute hearing to locate their prey, and then with silent flight, they catch their prey unnoticed. Like other owls, they tend to swallow their prey whole and then regurgitate the parts they cut, the indigestible bits, which are usually feathers as well as fur and bones, in what's called a pellet. And that can be very useful to identify these owls. Barn owls usually start their breeding season between March and August. They usually mate for life, and their nesting site for a barn owl is usually a hole in a hollow tree, or on the roof, or in the roofs of barns, outbuildings, churches, and they can even nest in man-made nest boxes. And they will often have about 6 or 7 chicks, and both parents will take it in turns to look after the chicks, as well as protect and feed them until they're ready to fend for themselves. And barn owls are some of the best hunters among birds of prey, and they mostly hunt at dusk and dawn, which makes them crepuscular. And perhaps the most common technique is quartering, when a barn owl slowly and deliberately flies in lines above a field before pausing to hover in the air while it watches for small mammals below. They can fly across fields to catch their prey unnoticed, because they have very soft feathers around their wings, which give them silent flight, so their prey doesn't know it's coming until it's too late. And barn owls are most active at dusk and dawn, which, as I mentioned just now, makes them crepuscular. And of course, they are quite often seen soaring out across fields and looking out for prey, and also patrolling their territory for rivals who come looking for trouble. But unfortunately, this also has fatal consequences, as barn owls quite often get hit by cars when they hunt beside roads. And this is because the barn owl flies so low and it gets dazzled by the car's headlights. This can cause the deaths of many barn owls, which is actually quite heartbreaking. And barn owls have some of the best hearing of any bird. Their heart-shaped face is almost like a satellite dish, and can pick up the tiniest movements of prey, and